often when a subject is being discussed or debated, one side of the equation will use this phrase. They'll say, "Oh, that's a very narrow view," and it's in reference to their opponent. They'll say, "Oh, that it's very simplistic or very narrow." And they'll use this idea of narrow view, and it's an idea that's spilled out into other things too. But that's where you'll often hear it is an accusation of having a narrow view. And there's this kind of a connotation that comes with it that somehow the narrow view is a bad thing. Having a narrow view is a really bad thing. That you're closed and you're restricted and you don't know as much. Somehow you're less informed or something if you have a narrow view on something. And so we're often encouraged to have a wide view or to broaden your horizons, we'll say. We'll have all this kind of lingo around the idea of widening and opening and this idea of getting a bigger view, as if somehow that makes things automatically better, right? That you will somehow be a superior person for that. So something here I want to try and touch on today in this idea of a narrow view. I think that it's really important that we do have the ability to think broadly. So I'm not actually speaking against that, but I want to use this a little bit of a caution in what frequently happens with these ideas of extremes, is that we end up throwing something away because of this extreme view that we should be so wide open that everything can come in. It's really, really dangerous, actually, because it's not good. Now, this claim will often be used about a person on moral grounds. They'll be like, "Oh, you have a very closed view, or you have a very narrow view of moral obligations," and so we'll kind of shame somebody for their narrow view of what's right and wrong instead of having a broad view for what's right and wrong. And this is an example of the danger in it. Or we'll sometimes use it as a way to tell a person they're not really being very smart, right? You haven't explored the subject enough, and so your view is to be discarded because it's not as wide as my view is, and it's just so dangerous. Now, understand, it can be true. There can be times when we have a very narrow view. If a person exploring some complex issue only ever looks at it from one angle or only ever explores one possibility, then certainly that is a narrowing of their view, a narrowing of their exploration that may end up inhibiting them coming to a good truth. But the problem is if we think that narrowing of an idea is bad, then we will think that resulting in a truth is bad. We will think that the end result can't be narrow. It also has to be wide. But see, what the process of coming to knowing something is a process of starting wide and getting narrow, is coming to a point where you start excluding things that aren't true until you can get down to the truth of something. Imagine if you're trying to figure out the cause of water in your basement, and you're trying to figure out like where did this water come from? You want to start with a fairly broad view, and you say, well, there's water coming here. It's not supposed to be here. I wonder where it came from. And you might look around your basement, look at the ceiling, and look at the walls, and look even maybe peel the carpet up, and try to figure out where's this water coming from. And you're open to a lot of options here. But slowly you're going to start to eliminate certain options. You're going to look at the walls and they're going to all be dry. And you're going to go, well, it didn't come from the walls. And so you're no longer going to keep that wide view. The walls are going to get excluded from the list of possible answers to the question. You're now going to narrow into the roof and to maybe the floors. It comes to something here. And as you eliminate the roof, you don't see anything. You look, you examine, no, that's not there. You're going to eliminate the roof from the possibilities. And you're going to narrow your view now down to just the floor. Maybe it's coming up from the bottom. Maybe it's seeped in from somewheres. And slowly you're going to keep narrowing your view until you arrive at the answer, right? You're going to say, this is where the water came from. Oh, it turns out my hot water tank burst and the water came this way. And so now I know what it is. I came in under this door and across the floor. I now know. And so now your view is so narrow, you're on one answer. It was the hot water tank or whatever it was. And you have an answer. Now your view is very, very narrow. It's no longer wide. It's narrow, and it should be. If you're then criticized by somebody saying, hey, you got this narrow view and it's not, you should spend $2,000 on a new roof. Well, you're going to end up losing a lot of money for something you didn't need to do because you opened your view back up to stuff that you really didn't need to do. And this is the idea. It is with everything in life. Yes, we want to have a place in our life where we have a broad view, but then there comes a point where we start to eliminate things and we come to certain foundational truths that we can then build our life on. And we want to narrow our view in on those things and then let them be rock solid, not sandy and broad, rock solid. So Jesus once said this idea that you need to enter the kingdom of heaven through the narrow gate, not through the wide gate. He talks about this wide gate. Everyone's entering through the wide gate. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's using their opinion. They're all going in. But through that gate is destruction. It's a dead end. But he says you need to enter through the narrow gate, a very narrow gate, which is him. He's the only answer. You go through that narrow gate, and then you're going to arrive at life. That's the right path. Pick it. Go through it. This applies to Jesus and faith, but it also applies to a large number of other things in our life. When we realize that it's actually not bad to have narrow thinking, once you've started with the wider thought and been able to intelligently restrict and narrow down until you come to the foundations of truth and then build on those things. This idea that truth is relative and just perspective and whatever you think is fine, whatever you want, that's a disaster waiting to happen. It really is. It's a sandy foundation. You will have a disaster. But if you can learn the good process of going from the wide to the narrow, where you realize what's really true and then build solidly on it and keep yourself on it instead of wandering off of it, you will have a successful life. You'll have a successful faith. You'll have a successful family. You will build a strong house because you've learned how to intelligently narrow your view. It's not a vice. It's virtue. It's a really important one to learn. Something for you to think about today.